Hello everybody, and welcome to this webinar from Kelso Consulting on how to get your SME business in the national media. We're particularly aiming at B2B SME businesses, whether you're a professional service firm, consultancy, technology business, software as a service, maybe financial business. For those who are joining us from consumer facing organisations, many of the things will work here for you, but we're particularly focusing on the needs of B2B businesses. By way of housekeeping, this webinar will be lasting an hour. Please do send your questions through using the question box as we go along. I will see if I can answer those which are relevant to a particular slide at the time. Otherwise, we'll also have time at the end for questions. By national media, we're talking particularly about the business media, that's the trade publications and indeed SME titles like Director, those such business publications, but we're also going to be particularly talking about the national newspapers as well, and we may well get a chance to touch on broadcast. Can I just say, some people say to me, oh, what about online? Well, there's almost no publications that aren't online, so we'll be unless I say otherwise, we are simultaneously talking about online versions and print publications. Indeed, many publications that used to be print, such esteemed trade titles as Accountancy Age and Real Business, are now only online. Where there is something that's particularly relevant to print, online or broadcast, I will flag it up, but work on the basis that everything I say is relevant to digital media, digital versions, print versions. And can I just flag up that just about every influential media website, with the exception of a very small number like BuzzFeed and Huffington Post and TechCrunch, just about all of the world's most influential online news sites are actually those that come from mainstream publications: Daily Mail, Guardian, Financial Times, BBC, all of those ones, and indeed international equivalents like New York Times and Washington Post. So many of the people joining us know Kelso Consulting. We have some clients, we have some other friends of the firm, so a big welcome to you. We also have people who don't know Kelso so well. A big welcome to you as well. So if I could just say a little bit about who we are and what we do. We are all about building powerful reputations for our clients. Ultimately, it is credibility that sells, reputation that opens the doors to decision makers, and it is trust that is needed in B2B purchasing decisions. And we help clients build that sort of authority, that sort of reputation. Now, this could well be through getting high impact national media press coverage, which is why we're here today. Certainly there is nothing that gives credibility to an organisation than them appearing in credible and authoritative media, but other things are very important as well, which we are indeed going to be touching on in some of our other webinars, around things like awards, case studies, events where you can speak, indeed webinars such as this, the importance of blogs, and of course demonstrating strong thought leadership, but we'll be particularly here focusing on the importance of getting in the national media and how to go about it. Just to introduce myself, my name's Tim Prizeman. I'm director with Kelso Consulting. I've been dealing with the national media, indeed all sorts of international media, local media, newswires, broadcasters, websites, bloggers, you name it. I've been dealing with them for over the past 20 years. I work with a range of B2B and financial businesses. Typically they're consultancy, technology professions, software as a service, wealth management. I do have clients that fall outside that area who have come to me on recommendation, but these are particularly the sorts of clients Kelso Consulting tends to work with. We've gained 4 National Public Relations Awards, and indeed for SME businesses, 3 of those have been in limited budget campaigns. So you don't have to think that it's all about spending large sums of money that gets you the prominent national coverage. Far from it. Some of our most successful campaigns in terms of both impact and coverage generated have been on very limited budgets, and we'll be talking through some of that later on as we go. And also, I'm the author of the Thought Leadership Manual book, available in only the best bookshops, but also online at places like Amazon and Wordery. So do get a copy if you fancy knowing more about thought leadership, and indeed makes a wonderful present for a loved one. Okay, and in terms of how we help B2B businesses, well, we tend to take a start to finish process, find out right from the start what it is that's going to help them build a sort of powerful reputation with clients and other influencers, right through to creating strategies, delivering programs, and ultimately working damn hard to make our clients more successful. So I think in terms of what works with the national media, it's worth thinking about some of the things that don't work, as dare I say it, I've encountered all of these along the way. Quickly, celebrity endorsements. I'm not saying don't do a celebrity endorsement. We all know the power of celebrity, but don't expect spending £10,000 to get a celebrity to turn up at your event, say lots of nice things about you, is going to generate press coverage. Celebrity endorsements are ultimately 10 a penny. The only time journalists really are interested in writing about them is when the celebrity does something unfortunate and they're in the news for the wrong reason. So I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm just saying don't expect the journalist to suddenly write lots of coverage about you. Maybe it will work for local media, but we're here talking about the national media. The same for sponsorships, whether you're spending 10,000, 50,000, £1 million, don't expect the media to automatically think that that is a big story. Again, works at local level, sometimes works at trade publication level, particularly if you're spending an eye-popping amount. Ultimately, the way to get coverage for sponsorships is to get your name in it, so that every time journalists mention it, they have to include you in it. But as a story in itself, very limited, if a chance of impact. Same applies for charity events and tournaments. You'll probably pick up a trade publication, a local publication, and see that these things do get coverage. What you've got to bear in mind is that there's probably 30 others that didn't get coverage because so many of them get promoted. So again, I'm not saying don't do these things, but what I'm saying is don't do them in order to get coverage. Don't say something outrageous for the sake of it. Some people do. I think ultimately it backfires on them. If you want to say something outrageous, my suggestion is have a sleep on it before you go and do it, and then ask the opinion of people whose opinion you trust. The same, a lot of people feel that Richard Branson gets lots of press coverage, so they need to behave like Richard Branson. The reality is the job description for Richard Branson has been filled by him. You don't need to act like him, and indeed there's probably only room for him anyway, and he also has the advantage of being a billionaire. Cut your own furrow would be my advice on it. There's plenty of people who don't act like Richard Branson who get lots of coverage, or indeed the sorts of coverage they want. And ultimately, new product announcements, you might find this a bit strange or dispiriting, as many businesses want lots of coverage for their new products, and you might see certain products, particularly consumer ones or really innovative ones, getting lots of coverage. But the reality is journalists get bombarded with new product announcements, particularly new tech product announcements, and for various reasons they are not interested in them. And you only need to, if you don't believe this advice, all you need to do is go to credible business websites and go through them. Maybe tech product announcements will get lots of coverage in very niche tech product ones read by your rivals, but in terms of the ones read by end users, in any credible one, barring a few very niche areas, journalists don't cover them, and you can just Google your rivals and see this. What we will be doing in the next few weeks is we are running a webinar on how to launch your tech product. So if you want to successfully launch a tech product, and indeed want lots of coverage as a result of that, that is the webinar for you. But do carry on with this as well, as a lot of it will be very relevant. Oops, I've gone backwards. So, what are the things you should be doing? Well, the first approach, and the easiest one, is a tactic that many people don't apply and should do more, which is write letters to the editor. You will know that most publications have a letters to the editor section. By this, I'm not talking about the random rants that appear in comment sections under articles. I mean the formal letters to the editor section, where people have submitted something. It would be by email for publication, and these appear online and in print. And indeed the Times' letters is particularly famous, and the Telegraph's are famous for the proverbial colonel in south of England contributing to them. I have to say these are very successful. My letters have appeared a number of times in the Financial Times, and I've always been contacted by people I know who've read them, and it's started up that sort of engagement. One of my clients indeed gained, they're a German client, they wrote a letter to the Financial Times. It was read by a law firm in Greece that commissioned them on an international insolvency appointment. So it leads to all sorts of opportunities, but more importantly, it's positioning you there as a credible contributor online. The same is true, magnified more, by writing expert articles. We'll come on to writing expert articles a bit later on, and by expert articles I don't mean that you have to write 2,000 words of detailed analysis. We're talking about articles that position you as an expert. So here are a couple of examples from past few months of clients who have written articles and they've appeared. The formula is pretty straightforward. What you want to do is comment on an article that has appeared that day or the day before. If it's too historic for a national newspaper, they've moved on. If it's a monthly publication, it should have appeared the previous month. If it's a weekly one, it should be appearing in the previous weeks. If you get a publication and it's gone round the office and someone says, here's an article that was 2 months ago, we should comment on it. Sorry, you've missed the boat. It's a news publication. So with these ones, again, it follows a very straightforward formula. You reference the article, you elaborate on an aspect on it as succinctly as possible in 2 paragraphs, and then you have some either roundup or wry comment at the end, and it comes from you, and you make sure you mention your organisation. So as we'll see on this one, we have 2 from Gary Dixon, chairman of the Association of Independent Non-Executive Directors, who's we're running a campaign to launch this organisation. And in the middle, on the section on the left, we have a comment from the GMDN agency picking up on, in this case, doctors not writing in clear English, and we use that as a way of talking about their particular area, which is the regulation of medical devices. So again, it's all about positioning them as expert commentators, and indeed Google likes this sort of thing for those of you who are concerned about your search engine rankings. But it's a very straightforward, very time effective way of getting into quality national newspapers and trade publications as well. The second one is thinking very much about case studies and end users. So first one might be using your clients as case studies, and this is particularly the case. It could be because you're announcing a new product. If you're doing a new product, you definitely want to have a prominent notable organisation using it already as the hook, but more generally, organisations are interested in how businesses have used your product or service as part of their success, and there needs to be a clear link to it. I've had a number of cases where people have said, well, some of our clients are successful, ergo we must be good. I'm afraid that's not going to cut it with the media. There needs to be a direct link between them using your product and them being successful. So for instance, if you are a provider of a particular professional service, it's not good enough that you do their books and provide them tax advice. It needs to be how that has contributed to their success. And indeed, perhaps in the case of an accountant, it could be how they were getting into difficulties because of a lack of financial control, lack of financial information, and you turned that around, and since then they've been able to focus on growing the business and it's been dramatically successful. That is a good case study. We have lots of clients who use us, but there's no particular link between our success. Not a good case study, and that applies to all B2B case studies where you are looking to get them into the media. I'm not talking about ones you would have on your website. That's absolutely fine to say we've lots of clients that use them, they're very successful and they find it an important part of their daily routine, easy to use, great interface, all of those sorts of things, fabulous for the website. But we're talking about the national media where they have a much higher bar for these sorts of things. The other way to think about it is to think of your business as a case study. So at the moment, there are journalists desperate to find businesses that are Brexit case studies about how they're going to be affected either by uncertainty, by no deal, those sorts of things. But it doesn't have to be around contentious subjects like this. Every month there are various bits of economic data published. Journalists want to know how things like unemployment figures, growth figures, regulations by the government, those sorts of things are impacting businesses. The same with the budget, which recently happened. They want case studies of businesses. How do the different tax changes affect them, their employees, that sort of thing? So again, a good way for a business to get in the media is to start offering themselves up as a case study. You need to clearly be thinking a bit about this in advance and how you can turn it to your advantage. I have to say that the media has a preference for what they would call photographic real businesses. So by that they typically mean manufacturing, but there are ways and means to think about how to make it more photogenic. So with one of our clients, they wanted to be seen as Black Friday experts. They were monitoring, they talked about website robustness and capacity, so they were monitoring the different retailer websites to see which ones were going down. The media wanted to use this as a bit of a backdrop to talk about, to interview them for things like News at 10 and Sky News. So we had it projected in their office on a wall to make a bit more of an interesting backdrop. So there are ways and means for service and technology businesses to get round the media's bias for manufacturing businesses. But it's all about planning in advance, thinking it through, rather than just popping up on the day and thinking, oh, why don't we offer ourselves as that's in the news? Really, by that stage, it's too late. The decisions have been made well in advance. A third way, which I have to say is a very powerful way, is to start a campaign, perhaps to change laws, change regulations, influence behaviour. Law firms are very good at this, particularly firms where there's a particular social justice element to it, but it doesn't have to have a social justice element, although that certainly will get journalists' pulses racing. In a particular example of this is a client of ours wanted to, they're very big in the payments area. There were some EU regulations going through that would potentially be of benefit to their big retail sector clients, so they organised a lobby of Parliament, invited representatives from the big supermarkets and others along to it, met with MPs and Lords involved with it, and of course that created a huge hook that was very impressive to the media. What I would say also, this was very impressive to their clients. You might think that these big organisations get together and discuss these sorts of things. Not so. If it hadn't been for the initiative of my clients, a SME payments consultancy, none of this would have happened. Clearly, it puts them, first of all, it's great for generating press coverage for them, but far more importantly, it put them in a huge position of authority as a mover and shaker in the market, and indeed got them lots of access with people it would normally have proved very difficult to reach. So do very much think about campaigns to change laws, regulations, not just for getting press coverage. Clearly it needs to be something you believe in, but it can be very effective for all sorts of opening doors, building a powerful reputation that then creates a great platform for getting business trade publication, local publication, broadcast publication and national media publication, publicity. Now, you will have detected a theme within this, that the right way to go about getting coverage as an SME business is less about promoting yourself and more about positioning yourself as an expert and being able to comment on external events. And the more you can position yourself as the expert, the easier it is to get coverage, and indeed the more coverage you can get, rather than being inwardly focused about your products and how different you are to your competitors, which, as important as that is for marketing, is of very little interest to journalists, not really the sorts of things they write about. So going the next level up is doing research and analysis. Now, clearly there are costs involved to commissioning surveys, although actually they are not substantial if you go about it the right way. And certainly we work with a lot of clients of all sizes to get big impact on modest outlays, and by modest outlays I'm talking about £2,500 for research by credible research agencies into nationally representative samples, the sorts of research that journalists report on regularly, and indeed you'll often see them quoting surveys that say YouGov says this and Mori says that and Comres says something else. We'll come on to an example of that in just a moment, but it doesn't have to be surveys. It can be analysis of data. This data may well be publicly available data. It may well be your own data. If you are a software as a service company, you have tons of data within you, and that can be analysed. Indeed, we do analyse it for SaaS companies and turn it into all sorts of reports, industry benchmarking studies, those sorts of things. So that is a very powerful use of your own data, but also publicly available data. And big firms aren't shy of doing this themselves as well. A couple of good examples: you'll often see the insolvency arms of people like KPMG and BDO and people like that in the news. All they are doing effectively is doing a monthly analysis using keywords of databases, looking out for recent insolvency appointments and other announcements. Now, clearly this is time consuming and they get a junior person on it. There's nothing, quite frankly, that's beyond the resources of even fairly small organisations to get someone to do that, whether on a one-off basis or a regular basis. Another good example is BDO, who, as you'll know, there's all sorts of economic polls and reports that come out each month. So what they do is do a poll of polls and get lots of coverage for their poll, which is clearly just a rip-off of everyone else's. They aggregate them together and do a poll of polls. So a little bit of thought, a little bit of thinking about what you want to say, what data is available, how you would illustrate the sorts of things you the comments in an innovative and interesting way allows big campaigns on small or very limited budgets by SME organisations. An example of this is one we did just a month ago for one of our clients who are a financial services investment organisation. In this case, they want to talk about how people are losing money through having it in the bank account. We work with them to create a survey of savers, again all on a very limited budget. In this case, the 10th anniversary of the financial crisis presented us with a very good hook for using it, and this article appeared in the Daily Telegraph quotes them throughout. Indeed, the whole article is based on us going to them with the story. The chart is from them, and they get quoted in it along with some other organisations. So again, you can imagine this sort of article for a relatively new organisation in the market such as financial services, where trust is absolutely fundamental. It's a very powerful way of them competing with much more established brands. So, expert comment. So clearly we've been talking here previously about how having research and analysis to ultimately give some interesting points is a very powerful platform for positioning yourself as an expert commentator. Indeed, journalists say opinion is cheap, facts are expensive, so they very much like data as giving proof points, but it isn't the only way to go about it. So here are some recent coverage we gained for, again, this is for INED, the Association of Independent Non-Executive Directors, which is a new organisation that is in the process of being launched, and they are looking to get press coverage, both to get people talking about them, build their credibility, and ultimately something that they can re-promote across social media and other channels to help drive people to various launch events they are having. And part of the coverage, as you'll see, has been getting press coverage through letters to the editor. Part of it has been about announcing, in this case it was a prominent industry figure has joined them, and a big part of it as well has been about getting comment articles in such publications as the Financial News, which for those who don't know is the must-read newspaper, an online website for those in the city and the global financial markets. If you want to subscribe to it, it costs well over £1,000 per year, and indeed Insurance Age, if you're looking to target regional insurance brokers, that's the publication for them, professional advisor for financial advisors and money marketing. With those ones, it's been coverage has come about through piggybacking on important industry announcements. So in one case, it was the super complaint that the Citizens Advice, they don't call themselves Citizens Advice Bureau anymore, it's just Citizens Advice, recently launched, where they are using their position as expert experienced non-executives to warn that this super complaint is going to cause insurers big problems. For Insurance Age, it was all about how the FCA is focusing on governance and ethics, again to provide expert comment and warning to boards that this is a hot area for the FCA and what they need to be doing about it. Very much for the Financial News as well, talking about how asset managers need to revamp their boards. So again, all of these things are linking to things that are in the news, important issues that provide a hook for them to provide expert comment. In this case, their legitimacy doesn't come from research, it comes from a mixture of an interest in insight, their own position as being experienced non-executives, and its relevance to those particular sectors. So with Insurance Age, our message was very different to financial news, albeit as you'll see, there are clearly overlapping elements to it. So, being the expert commentator. Now, as a B2B organisation, you're actually in a very powerful position, although many organisations get a big sort of shot of self-doubt about they should be the expert commentator. But the reality is you are, if you're a consultancy or professional advisory firm, you are providing expert comment, insights and advice every day, and people are coming to you with their day-to-day with their business challenges. You are in a very powerful position, and clearly this can then be built on to provide expert comment, to provide letters to the editor, to even lead to industry campaigns, as we described earlier on. If you're a software as a service company, you have data within you, and you are also dealing with all sorts of organisations, whether through your sales team, through the technical specialists, and through your no doubt your own research into customer and prospect attitudes. These are all powerful ways that you can build on to start positioning yourself as an expert commentator. So, being the expert, what do you need to do? Well, very much preparing in advance. I explained a bit about earlier about offering yourself as a case study, but it's even you should be planning even longer in advance for this. Ultimately, you don't want to be just popping up on the day. You want to have been positioning yourself well beforehand with journalists who are likely to be writing about it, that you're the expert. You need to be briefing them about the subject. You need to be building your reputation. Ultimately, other people are doing this. So if you pop up on the day and they've got an established relationship with someone else, the chances are they're going to go to people they trust. That's not to say you can't break into this circle of trust with them, but it just means don't do it on their busiest possible day. Do it in advance. Now, it may sound counterintuitive, and a big part of my message is indeed go for topics that journalists write about, but at the same time, don't go for the same topics everyone is writing about. It's very easy to look at the shed loads of coverage there was about GDPR and indeed now about Brexit and say everyone's writing about those, there must be lots of opportunity there. Well, in certain areas there are, but in terms of getting into the mainstream national media, can you imagine how many Brexit emails, research studies, these sorts of things they receive every day? You are in what is very much a red ocean, if you know the red ocean, blue ocean analogy. Red ocean is where the battle is and all the blood is. It's a bit of a fight. My thought is, particularly if you are planning for the long term, go for blue oceans. If you wanted to talk about GDPR, the right time to do it wasn't 3 months before it started to hit. The right time to start was a couple of years in advance. That's not to say journalists were writing so much about it, but it allows you to build up your authority, your reputation, your credibility, so that once it starts to become redder and redder, you are there in the lead. So again, very much don't think necessarily about what's in the media at the moment, although clearly that can be a good opportunity. It's also thinking about what will be in the media down the line, so we can position ourselves now so we get the best coverage when it's a big issue, rather than leaving it till the last minute when people have already got their foot under the table. And ultimately, have interesting, memorable, quotable quotes, facts, analogies, you will never get into the media, or very rarely, by saying bland, uninteresting things. If you may well see some quotes where people have said such things, but typically they've provided some interesting stuff as well, that either has on an off the record basis, or it's a payback for past help along the way. I'm not saying about providing journalists with juicy gossip and insider details. I'm not saying people don't do that, but I'm certainly not saying that's what you need to do. But what you've got to think about is people make the big mistake of thinking dealing with the media is a very transactional basis. They pop up when they want something, they expect the journalist to jump and report it and do what they want, and then they want to disappear again. Now, the clue is in the title, media relations. It's all about building a relationship with the journalist. Sometimes you'll get coverage, sometimes you won't, but ultimately you are building up reservoirs of goodwill with people that allow you to get the coverage when you need it by having that sort of relationship built for you. Now, clearly PR agencies help with this, but ultimately what you want is to start building that relationship with a journalist, and then it will prove a very valuable and powerful relationship, both for you individually in your career and for the business that you work for, or indeed you may well own. So again, be memorable, be distinctive, and don't think of it as a transaction, think of it as a relationship. So you want to get started. Well, the very first thing I would say is know your targets. Start reading the publications you want to appear in. It's amazing how many people have said to me, I'd really like an article in The Economist. The Economist never ever carries authored articles. So it's already an impossible one. That's not to say we can't get clients in The Economist. We do, and indeed letters to the editor is one way of getting in there. But if you want an authored article in The Economist, you'll need to buy an advertisement. So think a bit more about what works for targets. So with broadcasters, they either want the very important or the very quirky. They want it to be visual for TV. For radio, visual isn't very important, but it needs to be something that will work when there's no visualness to it. And ultimately it needs to be planned in advance through forward planning. Or if it's something that's come completely out of the blue, they will be in touch immediately and want you to drop everything and get down to the studio. So it's either an immediate reaction or it's something planned in advance. So for instance, we had one of our clients on BBC Today programme just a couple of weeks ago. I started flagging that one up to them 2 weeks in advance, albeit they only confirmed the night before. But having said that, there were some warm signals in the meantime. So that's the sort of timescale you're working for, unless it's an immediate news opportunity with a broadcaster. With national newspapers, either it has to be very important or it has to be relevant to their specific readership or elements of it. The tabloids have a big appetite for photographs and case studies. Certain bits of papers have a particular appetite. You'll see in some of the business sections, they like having an SME case study. Again, the more quirky the better, because you can imagine how many of these they get pitched to them each week. So think about the specific requirements for it. If it's The Guardian, if you're employing a refugee, That's a Guardian case study in the making. Probably less of interest to the Express and Mail, albeit maybe there could be an angle there as well. So again, it's something like, well, what is a real distinctive angle that's going to hit it on the head for them? Business magazines, there's huge opportunity for comment by making things relevant to their specific niche readership. Indeed, that's a large part of what we do for our publication. For some of our clients, is get a theme and go through the various business publications, angling it for whether it's tech companies, freelancers, plumbers, retailers, whatever their particular targets are, taking the same message and going through it. They have a strong appetite for expert comment and top tip articles, and they are, in fact, like national newspapers as well, keen to hear from business leaders who will talk about industry issues, not just their own products. So, we'll be coming on to questions in just a few moments for our final few moments. But ultimately, you're going to be working hard for coverage. You want it to help you with your business. Don't just hope your prospects, other stakeholders, perhaps potential employees are going to randomly bump into the coverage in print or online. The more you work your coverage, the more it is going to build your reputation. Now, people will read the coverage and come to your website. So make sure your website looks good and make sure you are capturing visitor details. The amount of websites, particularly B2B ones, I come across where there is maybe tucked away on, hidden away, a subscribe to our email list or a phone number. That's not good enough. Most people will be bouncing in and bouncing out of your website, and you've no idea who they are, and you've got no way of following them up. You need to work hard about having calls to action, offers, things like this to capture visitor details. We won't have time to go into that much more, but suffice to say, most B2B websites don't have it. Most B2B websites are not working very hard at all. If your website is one of them, do something about it. Reuse the coverage you get on your website, and don't just have it tucked away in a recent press coverage thing that no one's ever going to see. Have it, if it's a really good bit of coverage, have some mention of it emblazoned on your website. You'll see a lot of tech startups have, and indeed financial startups and all sorts of businesses, when they get the coverage, they make sure they put as mentioned in the Times, Telegraph, Financial News, wherever it is. Reuse it in your social media, not just once, but quite a few times. Make sure you mention the publication. Maybe they'll retweet you, maybe others will. Indeed, make sure you organise people you know to re-like, reshare, retweet, all of that sort of thing. Reuse it in your marketing. Clients of ours have commented once they've started using press coverage in their marketing emails, they've had more opens, they've had more engagement, they've ultimately led through more click-throughs and more business. One of our law firm clients said when they started to mention the coverage for them in the Times we had gained for them on their website, first of all, it meant, and this was a no-win, no-fee law firm in the financial mis-selling area. First of all, they found that people who came to their website were more likely to come back. So it was people comparing them against competitor law firms. Once they had that on there, people were more likely to come back. And also those people who came back were more likely to become clients. So ultimately, it shows the power of gaining the press coverage, but also the power of reusing it and how it impacts on your credibility with potential clients. So make sure you are using the coverage as fully as possible. And finally, don't stop. You send one letter to a publication, it doesn't get used. You phone up a journalist, they don't return your call. I'm afraid that's the nature of the game. It's a sales game. You're very lucky if your first sales call gets a new client. It's very lucky if you have 100% conversion rate for your emails and your sales calls. It's the same with press. Most people try it. Many people anyway try it once, give up too easily. You've got to be doing consistent activity. Certainly you want bursts around particular campaigns, but as I've mentioned, it's all about building the relationships, and ultimately journalists may not want to write about your topic when you want them to write about it. They'll want to write about it when they want to. So it's all about having some measure of regularity with particular campaign bursts within it. So what are your next steps? Well, if you're looking to do this sort of thing, and I thoroughly recommend you do, certain things that you would want to do. Well, I would suggest get hold of your target media, the ones read by your prospects, or indeed ones you think you would like to appear in, and get to know them, read them through, look at the opportunities, look at how rival businesses have got in, looking at how businesses where you think, well, they're similar to us, they're the same size of us, we could have said that, we're doing that. Look at how they've got in. Well, if they've got in, it's probably going to work for you as well. Do experiment with writing letters to the editor. Get the publication, look through the stories, see one you can comment on, draft something quickly, get a colleague to quickly look at it, send it to the journalist. In fact, send it to the letters. It's usually letters at so and so, but it will say on the publication, and don't give up the first time, but don't write a long essay. 3 or 4 paragraphs is a pretty good one to aim for. You probably already have material that could be reused as press articles. This could be blogs, this could be white papers, this could be things you've written for specific clients, this could be case studies you've used, all sorts of material. You've probably got a lot of material. Maybe it's not exactly right in its current form, but it would certainly be something that could be repurposed quite easily. So again, offering that to journalists. What I would say is don't write an article and offer it to a journalist. Always go with a synopsis. I won't go into the reasons why, but at the end of the day, one of the important ones is if you offer a journalist an article that's ready written, it does smack of them being offered warmed up leftovers, when really what they want is something that's been freshly cooked for them. And do mobilize your team, whether it's getting clients to agree for case studies, people who can, who would be experts, getting people looking out for data, brainstorming, people with strong views who would be good as commentators. Mobilize your whole team. Don't think that it's one of these things that you have to do. Certainly if you're the business owner, there are occasions when it should be you are indeed the ambassador for your business, but it doesn't need to be you. The most senior person in the organisation does not need to be the person who writes articles, letters, things like that. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So don't just think everything has to be you. Okay, so questions. Jerry, what about press trips or inviting media on events to experience a service or an event? Any tips? Well, What I would say is that we are now in the world where the number of journalists has been cut to beyond the bare bone in most organisations. As a couple of examples, once upon a time, accountancy age had about 10 journalists on it, a number of people with the title editor in it, sub-editors as well, features editors, features journalists. There are at least 10 journalists on it. Now it has 2 part-time journalists on it. The independent newspaper, in its heyday, it had about 24 business journalists, and they couldn't fit in the meeting room. Now it has 2 business journalists, and it shares them with the Evening Standard. So to try and get journalists, quite frankly, it's pretty hard nowadays to get journalists to go to their own coffee bar to meet you, let alone get them to go to your organisation. So you are going to have to offer something pretty amazing to get them out of their office. A better ploy is to go and meet them, but again, what they want is something where they understand that it's going to lead to a story or a series of stories, and something that they can't get by cut and pasting a press release. So I think by all means, if you have something, do think about inviting journalists along to it. But I think for most organisations, you are firmly swimming against the tide in seeking to go back to the good old days of the late 1990s, early turn of the century, where you could throw a whopping great party, whether it was in London or an exotic location, and have lots of journalists queuing up to come to it. Those days have largely gone, unless you really I think for anyone on this webinar, you're probably not in that unless you've got something pretty amazing to offer. Okay, next question. Do journalists only deal with people they know? Well, quite frankly, this is a big myth that journalists only deal with their established contacts, and I think there's plenty of PR agencies who like to fan this myth. The reality is journalists will deal with anyone who's going to give them a good story, but clearly if they deal with me regularly and I have a good track record of providing them with good stories, they're more likely to answer my email and return my call than you are, and indeed I may well have their private number and things like that. But at the end of the day, there is no law against anyone picking up the phone and calling a journalist, and indeed some people are very good at it, and there's no reason why you shouldn't do it. There is no reason why you shouldn't email journalists. What I would say is that PR agencies give you the edge, or a good one does anyway, but again, there's absolutely no reason why people can't do it. And if you don't have budget for a PR agency, give it a try. Okay, question: are press releases the best way to deal with journalists? So the short answer to that is no. Ultimately, certainly press releases are a useful thing, but what ultimately a journalist wants is something that their competitors don't have, and the one thing a press release provides is the same thing to everyone. So typically our approach, for instance, with the Bond Mason example earlier, was to provide it as an exclusive to the Telegraph. And in media terms, what an exclusive means is they get to run it before everyone else. So it doesn't mean you don't provide it to other people, it just means they get it first. And the advantage of them getting it first is that they think, okay, we won't be running the same story as our competitor, so we will give it more space. And that's the trade-off that there usually is. You give them exclusivity, they give you more space. If it's an amazingly strong story, then you wouldn't want to go down that route. But I think for anyone who's on this webinar, that is the route you need to think about. Otherwise, you will provide it to lots of journalists, but they'll all think, oh, it's the same as everyone else, and you won't get coverage. So what a press release is good for, though, is if you've got some standard information you want to get out quickly to a wide range of journalists. This might be because you've got a story that you think would be quite good for a trade publication. Indeed, getting them the story so they can cut and paste it is a very good way of getting that sort of second tier of coverage. If maybe you also, for whatever reason, want to announce something, even if you're not expecting it to get coverage, but you want to inform journalists about it. So we've done this with clients where there's perhaps a regularity of things and we want them to know a particular thing's happening, so we'll send it out as a press release as a way of updating them. So press releases are a good thing, and you can also put them on press release distribution services and on your website and get online links and things like that with them. But in terms of the more credible the media, the less you are going to get it through a general distribution of a press release. Question from Chris: how important are a PR agency's relationships with journalists? Well, the thing with journalists is they move around and they also may be busy or covering other stories on the day that you want to deal with them or get a comment in or things like that. So clearly having relationships with journalists is very important so that you can, they're more likely to return your call, you're in ongoing contact. So that is important. But the key skill, as far as I'm concerned, and this is what I look for when I'm recruiting people, is can they sell a story to a journalist they don't know? And the analogy is clearly with salespeople. Again, with a good salespeople, they'll have a good book of contacts, and that is indeed great. But ultimately, if they can't sell outside of that, for most organisations, they're probably not much. They've got limited use. A good salesperson will be able to sell to various people. Okay, so what I will do is I've been told by my colleague I've disappeared, but I think I'm just going to carry on with this in case other people can hear me. And what I'll do is, we're recording this anyway, so I will send the recording out. So if what you're getting isn't so good, you'll get this. And if you can hear me, I'm just going to carry on for the last couple of questions anyway. Question here about the online, what is the value brought by a PR agency? Okay, well, clearly I like this question. So building on the question before, there's a number of values that are brought by a PR agency. First of all, we know what works with the media. We know what works with building your reputation with all sorts of people. So clearly a good PR agency brings a good amount of the ability to get things done quickly through know-how, and indeed you're not going to be learning at the mistakes, learning through mistakes. You are able to avoid that. Getting good access is indeed an important area, and we mentioned that has its advantages, but it's not essential. But ultimately, we know what turns journalists on, so whether we know a journalist or not, we're damn good at getting through the door, using our elbows, and we are better. We bring a lot of that to the party. Creativity and skills. Ultimately, PR people should be good at creativity. This may be creative writing, this may be ideas, this may be visually, but ultimately PR agency should be bringing creativity and ideas, and indeed brainstorming skills. And I have to say, brainstorming shouldn't be underestimated. The amount of times I've been with, particularly, dare I say it, professional service firms, and their idea of a brainstorm is everyone gets around the table, someone has an idea, you shoot it down, then the senior person has an idea, everyone jumps on it, and off we go with the first vaguely plausible idea. That isn't how a creative brainstorm works. Sometimes that sort of meeting has its role, but ultimately a good PR agency should be bringing some good facilitation skills and some ability to get beyond the first plausible idea, to have a range of credible ideas that are assessed, and ultimately bring in some good lateral ideas. Fresh and independent perspective is what we also bring, and for those businesses which are interested in domain authority, and particularly the software as a service businesses that are selling through whether it's organic search or whatever, ultimately want to become top of Google. The most credible websites in the world are largely media websites, and certainly for some of our clients, most of our work is all around building links for them from credible media websites with high domain authorities, 50, 60, 70, 80 out of 100, sometimes right up there in the 90s, getting those sorts of links through the sorts of things we've been talking about. So, wide range of value brought there. So question here, Richard, what tips, if any, for targeting freelance writers in addition to staff writers and reporters? Well, what I'd say, building on my bleak picture of the media earlier, more and more is being done by freelance writers. Now, this could be because the freelance writer initiates the idea and sells it to publication, or it might be with some publications the idea largely comes in-house from their features editor or wherever and gets passed down to a freelance person. So, but dealing with these people is very important. Now, in terms of dealing with them, it's largely the same sort of approach, other than if you ring up the switchboard, you're not going to get through to them. Some of them have their own websites where they talk about the sorts of things they're doing. Other times you can track them down through LinkedIn, Twitter, those sorts of things. So again, it's about building up relationships with journalists, freelance journalists who are covering your area, and establishing yourself as a good source of coverage. Bombarding them with press releases isn't going to work. You need to be engaging with them particular ideas that they can sell into their publications. Some of these freelancers they're quite amenable to meetings, so that's a good thing to do. Some of them are people with childcare responsibilities who quite frankly have a very limited number of hours a day and they want to maximise their writing in it. They need to be dealt with in that sort of thing. They're certainly not going to be interested in lunches. Many of them are based outside of London and don't get many invitations to lunches. So if you're happy to go, or maybe you're not based in London, some are based in your area, but if you're in the southeast, many of them have moved out to the southwest, the north, wherever, to live in more rural locations. If you're happy to go to one of those ones, then it's much easier to get the meeting with them. Okay, I think that is it for questions, but if you have any that occur to you, do email them to me at Kelso Consulting. You can get hold of me via the website, via this phone number, via our blog, and indeed by timp@kelsopr.com. And if you have other questions, I'll be posting them on my blog when I post the link to this as well. So thank you very much for joining with me. Apologies, we slightly overrun because of the volume of questions. Hope they've been useful for you. Hope to see you at one of our forthcoming webinars. Thank you very much. Goodbye.